you can never lose the way. You can never be abandoned by life. You can never be abandoned by yourself. You can never lose yourself, and you can never lose your way. Even if it seems like you've lost the way, you never can. The only time it can appear that we've left the way is when we believe we are completely separated from the whole. And even then, that's another appearance taking place in the way. So the only time we get in the way is when we believe ourselves to be separate from the way. But you can't be. So everything that we do is an expression of the way. There's only one way, and it's the same way everything is going. So even our attempts to be separate from the way are all a part of the way. So you can't lose yourself. So how would life be if every decision was predicated on knowing this? Decisions that take us out of the way, or that seem to take us out of the way, are decisions that come from taking from the world in order to fulfill an individual self. So every time we believe ourselves to be separate from the whole is the time that we are believing ourselves to be out of the way. And we will experience it as such. So this is why people seek happiness, is because they've created a reality that is separate. They believe they're fundamentally separate from everything else. And what happens then is that because we don't have the language or knowledge to interpret that experience, we try to find something that we think feels right. Doesn't feel right to be separate. Something about it doesn't feel true. But we don't verbalize it like this. So we start seeking what we call happiness in the place we do know, and that's the world. But the problem is that perpetuates the seeking of the way. So it's almost as though we're trying to be in the way without getting in the way. Because when we're trying to get in the way, we're getting in the way. So that takes us out of the way. Doesn't really, but experientially takes us out of the way. And from that point of view, it doesn't feel good. And when it doesn't feel good, we will seek to fulfill ourselves with something else. And that cycle is a paradox that keeps us seeking and moving through cycles of seeking to come back into the way, get out of the way, back into the way, and it's a constant cycling process. So the way is very simple. Whenever you're not believing yourself to be a separate individual, you're in the way. Whenever you don't believe yourself to be a separate individual, you're not in the way. Now you can hear these with a double meaning. Being in the way means you're in the way, but it could also mean you're in the way of being in the way. Something's getting in the way of that way. That would be the individual self. By the way, guys, if you haven't subscribed to the channel and you do watch the videos regularly, I would love if you would subscribe to the channel, because it massively helps the channel out and reach more people. Thank you. So let your decisions be predicated upon being in complete union with everything else. If you were the same as everything else, how would you act, think, feel, and behave? You wouldn't try to take from others. You wouldn't try to take happiness from them. You wouldn't allow a relationship to be predicated upon seeking happiness from that person. You wouldn't allow others to seek happiness in you. You wouldn't allow anything that would intentionally create separation in your experience. I mean, you could allow that if you wanted to, but the question would be, what would allow that? Only something that would believe itself to be separate would allow things that create separation to be maintained in one's experience. So being in the way is about not getting in the way. You're already in the way, so don't get in the way. It's very simple. You're only in the way when you believe yourself to be a separate, individual, temporary, finite self. Ask yourself, what would it mean to believe that? What would it mean to believe if you're limited? Does it mean that you're inside the head? Does it mean you're inside the body? Like, contemplate, what does that actually mean for you? Because a lot of people, they believe themselves to be separate, but they don't actually know how they have that belief. They don't know where it comes from within themselves. They just believe themselves to be a limited self. They believe themselves not to be infinite, without ever questioning, what is it about my finiteness that is real? Which part of that is real? Because if it isn't real, then you're not limited. If it is real, then you are limited. But most people believe their self to be limited without ever actually looking and checking to see whether or not they actually are. They assume they're limited. They assume they're limited because their body's limited. But your body being limited does not mean you're limited, right? Just because you can only read one book at a time, for instance, it doesn't mean you can't read other books. It doesn't mean you're only limited to one book because you have to read one word, one letter, one page at a time. We know that's not a real limitation. That's an intentionally created limitation for the purposes of enjoying a story. You can't enjoy a story if you just stare at a page. All one experience of a page. You can't read a story like that. So how do you expect to experience life without creating an intentional limitation? Life is an intentionally orchestrated limitation for the purposes of enjoying infinity. Isn't that quite beautiful? Infinity limits itself to enjoy itself, because as infinity, in the experience of infinity, it's like staring at a page. It's like getting a movie, opening up the whole film reel and just staring at it all. That's not a movie. That's not how you enjoy a movie. And that's not how you enjoy life. If you go into the absolute, there's no life there. I mean, it's the source of life, but it's not this. You see what I mean? And this is what we enjoy. And the way is the way that infinity sophisticatedly expresses in perfect, coherent harmony the possibility of diversity and duality within something that is fundamentally not dual and not finite. That should be impossible, but it's not. It's very possible. And that is the most profound unanswerable question and answer to the source of existence. The fact that it is, and the fact that somehow this is even though it isn't. That should not be possible, but that's just the magic of God. And that question should be very profound to us. That whole contemplation should be absolutely fascinating. So fascinating that it's what we think about for the rest of our lives to one degree or another. We let that fascination expand, not into that same fascination, but we let it expand into the fascination with everything. Every tiny piece of the way, every tiny piece of it, and every large piece of it. Because there shouldn't even be pieces, but we can experience them. So to that respect and to that credit, we should say that there are. So the only way you can get in the way is if you get in the way. So don't get in the way. What is it that makes you get in the way? Believing yourself to be separate from the way. What is it that makes you believe you're separate from the way? Believing you're a temporary, limited, finite entity. Because for as long as you believe that, you will seek to the seeking, you will seek some form of state of mind or happiness or some type of thing in the objective experience, whether that's in thought, feelings, or perceptions, or objects. It can be internal states as well. It can be external relationships. And the experience of that seeking is the experience of separation. And that experience of separation is the experience of suffering. So you can't have suffering and at the same time not have separation, and at the same time not have resistance, and at the same time not have seeking. If you're seeking, you are resisting, you are suffering, and you are in the midst of separation. So all of those four things are entirely the same thing. When you're not seeking, you're also not resisting, you're also not in separation, and you're also not suffering. When you're not suffering, you're also not seeking, you're also not resisting, you're also not in separation, and you're also not in resistance. If you're one of those, you're all of those, and if you're neither of those, you're none of those. You don't have to take your path so seriously in the sense that you constantly have to seek, because what you'll find is that you naturally don't seek a lot of the time. So start noticing when you're actually being the way, when you're being in the way, actually in the way, not in the way in the metaphorical sense, like you're getting in the way, when you're actually the way. And those moments will be most of the time when you're not suffering, when you're not resisting, and when you're not seeking something new. Seeking something new can obviously be a natural thing, but I mean seeking a new experience to replace the current experience that doesn't feel adequate enough. Because in freedom, you will seek new experiences, but not because you lack, but because you're so free, you have the freedom to have new experiences, which is what we call creation mode, which is where you are constantly creating. So let all your desires be everything's desires, because they are. Everything that is desiring is also desiring through you. Every desire you have is everything else's desire. And notice when you hijack those desires for personal gain, in other words, hijacking a natural desire in order for you to get personal happiness from it, because you don't need to do that. You only think you need to do that if you believe you're separate from everything else. So allow yourself the freedom to have desires and to let them be an expression of freedom, and to see the source of happiness is not in the world. The source of freedom is already present. It's already what you're experiencing, minus the belief that you're not experiencing it. So notice the times where you're not seeking, not resisting, not suffering, and just dwell on that. Just appreciate that. See that as freedom. Before long, you will start to move so effortlessly with the way that it will take you to every piece of knowledge or understanding that will make this way unconditional, that will make you live with the way. I have a free community. The link is in the description. If you'd like to talk about these with me personally, I host group conversations and meditations there. And the group is filled with amazing people, which I'm sure you'll love. Have an amazing day, guys. Take care.